Imagine this. The sun, our life-giving star, suddenly disappears, gone, vanished, no more sunlight. What would happen if the sun were to disappear for just 1 hour? Buckle up, because the consequences would be wild and not at all what you might expect. First, let's understand the sun's role. The sun is the center of our solar system, and its gravity holds everything in orbit from Earth to Pluto. Without it, the planets would no longer follow their familiar paths around the sun. But hold on, before we panic, the disappearance wouldn't be instant. Because light travels at the speed of 300,000 kilometers per second, the sun's absence would take 8 minutes and 20 seconds to reach Earth. So for that brief period, we wouldn't even notice. After those 8 minutes, total darkness would descend upon Earth. But don't expect it to be pitch black right away. The sky would still be visible, but only from the light reflected by the moon, stars, and distant galaxies. Now, let's get to the real consequences. First, without the sun's heat, Earth's surface would begin to cool rapidly. Within just 1 hour, the temperature would drop by a few degrees, but it wouldn't be freezing just yet. However, without the sun's warmth, things would start to get really cold really fast. Earth's average temperature of around 15 degrees would drop to about 18 degrees in just a few hours. And then there's the gravity. Without the sun's gravitational pull, the planets would no longer stay in orbit. They wouldn't just drift into space immediately, though. They'd continue moving in straight lines following their last orbital trajectory. But that's not the only problem. Without the sun's gravity, the Earth would stop orbiting and start moving in a straight line into the cosmos. Of course, we'd still be spinning on our axis, so day and night would continue to pass, but without any sunlight. Without sunlight, plants would stop photosynthesizing, the process by which they produce energy. After just an hour, most plants wouldn't be able to produce the oxygen we rely on. But don't worry, the Earth's oxygen supply wouldn't run out immediately. Plants can survive without sunlight for a little while, but they'd begin to suffocate over time. As for humans, we'd still have electric lights. But the absence of the sun would create chaos in terms of food and energy. We'd rely on stored energy from batteries, power plants, and emergency generators. But eventually, these would run out without the sun's steady input to the grid. The real danger would come after the 1 hour is over. Once the sun reappears, Earth's surface would continue to cool down even further, causing extreme weather patterns, massive temperature fluctuations, and maybe even triggering a mini ice age. So what happens when the sun comes back after an hour? Well, while everything will be dark and cold during that time, the sun's return would mean everything starts heating up again. But Earth wouldn't immediately return to its normal state. The cooling effect would take some time to reverse, but with the sun back in the sky, life would eventually return to normal. In short, while an hour without the sun would cause some short-term chaos, life on Earth would eventually bounce back. However, this strange scenario highlights just how reliant we are on the sun for both life and stability in our solar system. Now let's get into talking explosions. First things first, let's address an important point. Our sun won't explode in a supernova. That's because it's not massive enough. Supernovae typically happen to stars that are at least 8 times the mass of the sun. Instead, our sun will one day expand into a red giant, shedding its outer layers before finally collapsing into a white dwarf. So while it's not an explosion in the traditional sense, let's imagine what would happen if it did. If the sun did somehow explode, the event would release an unimaginable amount of energy. In a supernova, a star can release more energy in 1 second than the sun will in its entire 10 billion year lifetime. The explosion would send out a shockwave of light and radiation, and Earth would feel the effects almost immediately. Let's talk about what happens to Earth. The sun is about 150 million kilometers away from us, so the explosion's effects would take about 8 minutes to reach Earth, the same amount of time it currently takes sunlight to travel here. But this time it wouldn't be the gentle warmth we feel. Instead, Earth would be hit with a blinding flash of light and intense radiation. This burst of radiation would be so powerful that it would strip away the Earth's atmosphere, vaporizing it almost instantly. The intense heat would also ignite wildfires across the planet and cause the oceans to evaporate into the atmosphere, triggering massive climate disruptions and then total destruction. The Earth would be vaporized. It would no longer exist as a solid planet. The explosion from the sun would release so much energy that Earth would be torn apart, shredded by the force of the shockwave. Even if you survived the initial radiation burst, there wouldn't be much left to survive on. What about the rest of the solar system? The planets would be affected in similar ways. The sun's gravitational pull, which keeps all the planets in orbit, would suddenly vanish. Without that gravity, The planets would drift off into space, no longer bound to any star. Jupiter, Saturn, and the other gas giants would all drift away, along with their moons. For a moment, it might seem like chaos, but in the long term, it would mean that the solar system, as we know it, would cease to exist. There would be no more orbits, no more planets or moons dancing in their elliptical paths around the sun. In this new, empty, dark solar system, the other planets and their moons would continue to float through space, but without a star to warm them. They would become cold, lifeless worlds. Their temperatures would plummet to absolute zero and everything would freeze solid. Now let's talk about the sun itself. If it exploded in a supernova-like event, it would collapse into a dense, neutron-rich core, possibly forming a black hole. However, because the sun isn't massive enough to become a true black hole, it would likely just become a white dwarf after shedding its outer layers. The mass of the sun would remain, but it would no longer be a glowing, life-sustaining force. For those still around in the solar system, perhaps future space travelers, Earth would remain a frozen, desolate rock. It would drift aimlessly in space, no longer tethered to any star for warmth or light. It would be a lonely, silent world orbiting nothing. So in conclusion, if the sun were to explode, the results would be catastrophic. Earth would be destroyed in a matter of moments, and our solar system would be scattered across the universe, a former system of planets without a guiding star. Luckily, this is all pure science fiction. The sun still has about 5 billion years of life left before it even begins to transform into a red giant. But it's always good to appreciate our sun while we have it. Without it, life as we know it simply wouldn't exist. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more. Peace out.